If you get all of your information from traditional media, CBC, CTV, etc., you're probably thinking, immigration is not a major topic of conversation. But if your primary source of information is YouTube, it's actually a very different picture. So we've got this chart here in orange. We have the conversation about tariffs. In green, we have the war in Israel. And the blue line is the number of mentions of immigration on YouTube independent channels. It's pretty much on par with the tariff conversation, and it's maybe twice the size of the ongoing Israel conflict. So we see here the immigration conversation really got going around May, June of 2025, and it's been on pretty steady since, with probably a peak in the last few months.
When you see people in the streets behind a Canada First protest, it seems to be immigration is their main issue. At least that's what some of the coverage that I've seen, either online or.
Well, you bring up a good point. I have this other chart here that shows the split of between left-leaning voices and right-leaning voices, also YouTube independents. And as you can see here, that conversation is primarily occurring in the right-leaning channels.
It's in the right leaning channels. So what's the takeaway of that?
Well, it's conservative concern, much more so than the left-leaning channels.
Now, we did an episode on immigration a while back, and we were looking at what is the connection to housing, and whether is it driving up prices as an example. So immigration has been blamed for a lot of the ills that Canada is facing. And I mean that more in the sense of like regular everyday Canadians in their day-to-day life. They say, well, jobs, the housing, the healthcare, that the the boogeyman in the room. That's because we had uncontrolled immigration for too long, and this is the end result of it. Is that what is being said on these? So just to say they're talking about immigration, but what are they saying on those channels?
Well, there's several angles that are typically brought up. One has to do with the impact on common living conditions, whether it's healthcare or the cost of housing. That's certainly one important aspect. The other one has to do with the impact on the security and the safety of Canadians. It tends to revolve specifically around Indian immigration, and often what's happening in the Khalistani protests is brought up as an example of some sort of unruliness that's being brought from across by some of these immigrant populations.
Because some of the commentary that I've seen, I mean, it's downright racist. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat, especially when we're talking in terms of immigrants from India, who I think have traditionally have been perceived to be as a very welcome and productive members of Canadian society. There's been immigration from India within Canada for a very long time, but something has changed in the last couple of years. They changed the rules. A lot of more people came in from India. This seems to be behind why Indians in particular are being targeted on social media and having the figures pointed to them to say you're the source of our ills and our woes. Um, but is that what the mainstream conservative perspective is, or is it more of a policy issue?
Well, this is where you need a lot of nuance and understanding, depending on which channel you're listening to, and a lot of conservative voices will oppose that characterization and saying that we need to have a conversation on the numbers that are coming in, right? So it's not a question of not welcoming immigrants; it's a question of absorbing this immigrant population at a rate that we're able to sustain. So that's one end of the spectrum. And obviously, at the other end of the spectrum, you have the more extremist views that range all the way to dog whistles to great replacement theory, which is the theory that these immigrants are being brought into the country specifically to reduce the rights of the prior population, often the white population.
Because when we say the term quote unquote the right or conservative, it's not a homogenous group. There are many different slants or views or spectrums within that. And let's just look at, for example, the official Conservative Party of Canada. Immigration is one of their strategic messaging planks. They were on the cost of living that did really well for them in some previous reviews that we've done in terms of getting their message out and resonating with Canadians. They've now put more energy into the immigration story. Now, what they're focusing on is access to healthcare for asylum seekers. They want to restrict that. They are talking about if a immigrant breaks the law, they should be kicked out of the country. So they have a much tighter approach. But as to your point, they're not saying stop immigration because we do need to maintain the growth within our country in terms of population size. Canadians aren't having kids in the same rate that we need to, which is not the same as the replacement theory ones that you're talking about.
Oh yes, if you go, to the furthest right, you'll see a lot of folks saying they're disappointed with the Conservative Party and Poilievre with the latest announcements because they don't think it goes far enough.
Okay, so that's the right. What about the left or the traditional media? Where do they what is their role in this conversation?
Well, there is the left. If we look at the independent voices on YouTube, they're absent in this conversation because if they're not articulating the benefits of immigration, and if they're not countering the messages, especially from the more extreme positions, then they're essentially letting the other side win that conversation. If they feel it is an important battlefield, then they need to engage on that and engage in a way that makes it relevant to the everyday Canadian that doesn't necessarily always looks for, the policy discussion